Hi, thank you very much for coming today. I'm Bob Carey. I'm with the National Defense Committee. I'm one of the panelists for what CASE is holding today, and very much appreciate CASE putting this together to discuss the issues regarding higher education and what the role of the federal government is and should be. We're very lucky today to have with us the chair of the Higher Education and Workforce Subcommittee of the Education and Workforce Committee, Representative Burgess Owens of Utah. I had the pleasure of hosting I don't know if some of you know, there is an event going on in Milwaukee in July. And so we were both out there. We did an event about veterans and their educational benefits and what the issues are. And Representative Owens is kind enough to come on by and speak at that. But more importantly, he let me wear his Super Bowl ring, which was pretty darn cool. So, but he's going to give a couple comments about where he'd like to see things go, what his experience has been. And I just like if you can please give a warm welcome for Representative Burgess Owens.
It's always good to see familiar faces. I see Dr. Fox's team here. Let me just start off by saying one of the true honors that I've had. I'm one of those guys who never thought I'd be a politician, never thought this would be a part of my journey. But to come in and find that the passion, the focus Dr. Fox has put in this particular area, it's been very rewarding. I look at education as being a true national security issue. And I think the last couple of years, I think American people around the country realizing that it's very, very important that we can do everything else right. We can close the border, we can bring down inflation, we can do all the right things. If we do not have our kids understanding our culture, being excited about their future, taking this great concept of the free market and capitalism and freedom to the next level, then we would have failed them, we would rot within. So this is one of those things that, of all the things I've ever done, and I've played in golf 10 years, business owner, now congressman, all that pales to being part of a remarkable team that disrupts our education moving forward. This is intergenerational change. I'm here to talk about an area, I'm talking about intergenerational change. I know the impact of tying this down, make sure that our veterans are tied into successful transition, so they go out and become very productive, take that pride of service and put it back in their community. Because my dad was one of those. My dad was a World War II vet. It was interesting, I came through that era at quite different times when segregation was everywhere. He grew up in Texas. He was not able to get his postgraduate degree there because of Jim Crow laws. I ran across a box of letters after he passed away that speaks volumes to what that generation was all about. It was one in which you tell them they can't, and they're going to show you that they can. So his box of rejection letters was not the end game for Dad, and many people like him. He continued to try until he got to Ohio State, where he got his PhD in agronomy. That's where I was born in Ohio State. His older brother got his PhD in economics. They went on to teach for 40 years. Dad at Florida A&M, my uncle at University of Houston. Business owners, and more importantly, they had this desire to give back to their community, to our country. That generation, by the way, took advantage of the GI Bill. They all came back, served their country, and they came back and built the greatest middle class we've ever seen in the history of mankind. You talk about the values we have today, the things we can do today, was because that generation took advantage of education. And they went out there and found their niche, found their passion, and they gave back to our country in a different way. So we have to make sure we keep that going. So the rest of this I'm going to read to you, all right? Again, I want to thank you for being here. This discussion is very, very important. It's the nexus between military readiness, service, and our educational policies. Our military strength relies heavily on the dedication of men and women who serve. Unfortunately, we're facing some very serious recruiting challenges. Last year, our branches missed their recruiting goals by 41,000, bringing our active duty force to the lowest since 1940. This is a wake-up call. We need to make sure we're addressing the cause of this process and find some solutions. The recent study shows that a troubling trend, many of our Americans, young American people, do not consider military as a serious option. This disconnect highlights the need for smart, innovative approaches for both recruiting and keeping our next generation of military leaders. Educational benefits are a key tool for attracting and retaining talent. A 2021 study found that over half of military personnel and veterans signed up mainly to get these benefits. For men, for women, and those of minority populations, this number jumps even higher, showing us how crucial these benefits are. Here's the problem. The current administration is making it harder for veterans and active duty members to use these benefits effectively. The Biden-Harris Department of Education has imposed rules that complicate how our service members can use their educational benefits. I'd like to share 2 examples of bureaucratic meddling. The 90-10 rule and the gainful employment rule. The 90-10 rule, expanded over last year to cover GI Bill benefits, requires schools to get at least 10% of their revenue from non-federal sources. But the DC bureaucrats, in their infinite wisdom, has left distant learning programs out of this rule. Even though distance learning is booming, a growth of 900% since 2000 and expected, of course, to continue to grow. The other is gainful employment rule, which forces career education institutions to prove their graduates earn more than those who didn't go to college. This rule unfairly targets non-traditional schools, while traditional schools are given a pass with zero accountability. The reality is that non-traditional schools and distant learning programs have become very popular among military and veteran students for a good reason. They offer flexibility, accountability, affordability, and relevant career skills. These programs fit the needs of veterans who are often older, have families, and are transitioning into the civilian life. They also have a higher student retention rate and better use of their time management. So the solution, very simply, like it is across the board in education, is a level playing field. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. You guys remember those sayings? That's just my age showing up. Let's make it fair. Let's make sure it's based on meritocracy. And by the way, non-traditional are okay with that. They don't mind competing. Like my dad's generation, just show me what I gotta do, we'll make it happen. Because we have that entrepreneurial spirit that kicks into that. We believe that the military and veterans students should have the freedom to make their own choices about education. This is why the Ensuring Distance Education Act is so important. This bill will keep bureaucrats out of the business of picking and choosing educational winners and losers, letting schools of all kinds drive innovation and expand learning options. Our goal is clear: to push back against restrictive policies of the current administration and support the educational choices that best serve our military and veteran students. Doing that, we honor their service and build a stronger, more resilient force. As I wrap this up, let me just say, I think the goal moving forward is that every generation can talk about their previous generation the way I do about my dad's generation. When I say how proud I am to have been raised by them, is because they showed what it was to take advantage, first of all, serve our country, and come back being proud of their country and passing that pride down to the next generation. But also, their goal was to make sure the next generation is still on their shoulders. And that's what we all should be looking at. What would it be like to have our kids, our grandkids, running circles around us? I think think about how good that makes us all feel. That's the way America's always been. I'll say this too, I think we're on the precipice of some remarkable opportunities as we come into the next few years. I think we now have not only very innovative legislators, Dr. Fox's team is a good example of that. We're thinking outside the box, trying to figure out how to do things we have never done before. My hopes are we build a bigger majority in the House. You get the Senate, and you get President Trump. And you watch out what happens with education at that point. We're gonna find innovation, accountability, a vision that every child, no matter what zip code they live in, what their background is, the American dream should be available to everybody, not just those who happen to pick the right ticket or happen to be fortunate to be in the right zip code. Our promise to our nation and our generations is become a more perfect union. And how do we do that? Becoming educated. Ignorant free can never be, Thomas Jefferson. So we need to make sure that we're leading the entire world, guys. We are the country that should be out front in every aspect of education, not being satisfied being in the middle of the crowd. That's not who America is. We innovate. We look around and find out how to be better at what we do. We believe in meritocracy. So education has to be part of that process. Make sure our veterans, military, active military are truly thankful of being shown that we're thankful to them for their service, for their sacrifice, for the time they put away to make this work. So we're gonna make that happen. And I'm excited about being part of a team that's going to make sure that does happen. I'll say this, my goal, real quick Raiders story, if you guys don't mind. Is that okay? Okay. For those who don't know, I played with the Raiders back when they used to win football games. I know some of you young people have no idea what that is. But there was a time, you turn on the TV and Raiders were on, they were going to just win, baby. That's what it was. Part of that was the culture. Al Davis had this remarkable, he was a genius. He believed this idea of second chances. And it didn't matter what else was on the plate, he just wanted to make sure they won. So he brought guys that other teams just were tired of and couldn't put up with. The thing about that culture is that you put your foot in the field, no matter what position it was, the goal was not to be the weak link. That you did your study, you did your hard work, you did your sprint, so that position, when everybody looked at the film, was one that we were proud to be part of. I think that's where we are now in our country. We've had a lot of people, good people, who live in a little freedom bubble, building their families, their dreams, their memories, thinking that it's all gonna be okay because the right people on the field doing it, and realizing they're not doing anything. We need to be on the field being part of this. And I think every one of you guys, just keep this in mind. This is something we all can look back on. We hope to look back on one day, no matter what we're doing, what position we're playing, that we were part of that time when our country came back into this, that we played our part. Whatever that part is, just hustle. Last little thought, and this is what I'm hoping everybody can remember to get through this. It's something my team has adopted. My last year in high school was losing season, 4 years with the University of Miami losing seasons. The Jets, 7 years doing the same thing the Jets are doing today. 12 years of losing, to the point where after my 7th year in the NFL, I thought about retirement. I was so frustrated, so depressed that we're not, all the hard work wasn't paying off. Well, the next year we went to the Super Bowl. Here's what I've learned as I look back on that over the years. And I hope you guys look at this, think about this as you dive in deep to what you have to do in the next few months. We cannot control the scoreboard, but we can control the hustle, okay? Just remember that. So let's hustle, let's do our part to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to get the education they desire, that brings them out. And let's know that at the end of the day, we'll, like I said, we're part of that process. So thank you, Bob, thanks for the invite. And you guys keep it going, just one, David. All right.
Thank you so much, Congressman. Good afternoon. I'm Gerard Simica, Chairman of CASE, and want to thank everyone for coming out today. And thank you. We have a really great, accomplished panel spending their time sharing their work, their research that's so important. And a couple of threads that run through what Congressman Owens was saying is, if there are two issues, one is to pull back on the amount of regulation that the department is engaging in, or from the government in general, and also anything that they do impose, it be across the board, fair, unbiased, not picking winners and losers. And it really is such a critical, a lot of times when you graduate from school, you're like, I'm never taking a test again. College, that's someone else's problems. It's really a huge issue now just because it really does affect the fate of the nation, not just the workforce or our future. And reading a quick note from financial attorney James Hughes was speaking about the whole purpose of education from the Western European tradition and even in Confucian Asia was that they were building on family wealth. Not what families had or possessed, but what they did. That's how they built wealth, through knowing things, through knowing the latest technologies and ideas. That's how they would preserve it. And in an egalitarian society like ours, we having education available to everybody is what is most important. So I just wanted to make a few quick comments about, the 10 years or so ago, we never would see education or higher education as an issue, as a political issue. We all kind of we knew that academia skewed to the left. We had ivory towers and tenured professors, and we all made the most of it. If you were on the right or you were moderate, There's a funny anecdote from a few decades ago where someone had informed William F. Buckley that there was only one Republican professor in the entire political science department at Cornell, and he feigned surprise and said, "That many?" So that's something that we've been dealing with for a while, but now the bias is seeping into the departments, the states, the attorney generals. It's concentrated, it's centralized, it's singular in purpose, and it's very dangerous because it is attacking basically the whole infrastructure, as like many of you are aware of the issues you've worked on, in trying to really just beat it to the core. For the past 2 years, we've been writing about and tracking the actions of the Student Financial Aid Office of Enforcement, their harassment, their bullying, their shakedown of career-oriented and non-traditional colleges. It was former CFPB director Richard Cordray, who everyone might know about his sort of dictatorial rule over there, was brought in, and he started a sue and settle strategy. The enforcement had really not been used very much at all, but in their first 2 years, they had 6 investigations, all against career-oriented colleges. Just went right out of the gate, right after them. And of the 13 investigations they started up until last year in the Biden administration, 10 out of 13 were against non-traditional and career-oriented colleges. And when you think that only 5% of the students that are matriculated in the schools right now are in these non-traditional schools or career-oriented, and 87% of the investigations and crackdowns on these schools, they made their agenda very clear. They're going after Christian schools, like $14 million fine against Liberty and a $37 million ridiculous fine against the largest Christian school in the country, Grand Canyon University, which is fighting back and refusing to pay it. They're firing across the bow, saying, playing by our rules or we will take you down. They have already taken out schools like IT&T and Corinthian College and many others, schools that couldn't afford to fight back against the DOE, and many never had the opportunity. And as I said, the DOE employs a very abusive sue and settle strategy, unilaterally declaring schools in violation of some rule, a complete violation of their due process. And with the DOE, you are guilty until you prove you're innocent, but you'll probably be broke by then. So we'll be hearing from some of the other pernicious and abusive powers the DOE has employed against for-profit, non-traditional colleges from our panelists. The idea just of debt forgiveness and free college, they just want to, agenda is just really just to shut them down. They want, aside from the prestigious schools with you get the ring and you can show it off to everyone, the Ivy Leagues and the really fancy ones, but the for-profits and community colleges, they really just want to take those over, put them out of business through free school. And right now we're seeing the effects. About 2/3 of college-age students or high school students don't trust in a college degree. They don't think it's worth it. And the free market has provided a natural remedy through these career colleges. They realize they can get an education that they can afford, that they can pay for, that will teach them a skill, that'll give them job security for life, that they can become an entrepreneur and open a business one day. And these schools are growing by leaps and bounds. Their enrollment rolls are taking off. So that is a natural free market response to an abusive, out of control education establishment. But they can't have that, so that is why they're now in the crosshairs and they're trying to take them down. And I think that we'll be talking about that a little bit more. I just want to close and say, I really appreciate what the committee staff, Congressman Owens and Wahlberg and Chairwoman Fox have done with the CCRA. They're reining in the abuses of the DOE, and instead of them acting as a unilateral legislative body, as judge, jury, and executioner, hopefully with this legislation we'll see more free market solutions, more open competition, and just an overall better opportunity for students in their futures. And with that, I'd like to bring up Andrew Gillen. Okay.
Well, thank you for having me, and thanks for coming. The topic I'm focusing on is student loan forgiveness, and we have some slides. We have some technical difficulties, so we can't show them to you. But really, it's just the one slide that you need to see to really get the gist of it, which is that there have been at least 9 different, fairly massive regulatory efforts under this administration to forgive loans, to waive interest, to reduce student loan payments. And so this is unprecedented on a number of levels. Number one, like you typically go in administration and see maybe one of these. So the fact that we've seen so many is pretty crazy. The price tag associated with these is also just off the charts. And so if you remember back to the first big student loan forgiveness plan, it was like 400 billion, 500 billion, which is orders of magnitude bigger than anything that had ever been discussed before. Even the smaller plans that have happened, the smaller regulatory changes that have gone through, they still have price tags of like $1 billion here, $2 billion there, which 5 years ago, 10 years ago, that would have been big news. Now, nobody even knows that these things happen because everybody's focusing on the $500 billion plans. And so that's just kind of the regulatory onslaught that has happened is very new for higher education in general and student loans in particular. But the kind of bright side is that if you look at what's happened when these regulations have run up into the court system, they're not doing well. So out of the 9, 5 of them have either been thrown out by the courts or are at least paused by the courts while their merits are evaluated. That is also unusual. In fact, the most recent one, there's kind of a forthcoming student loan forgiveness plan. Hasn't been released yet. We have some vague indications of what might be in it, but until it's finalized, who can say for sure? And the courts have already weighed in to stop that from being implemented until the courts can evaluate it. And so this is kind of a good news, bad news situation. Bad news, a lot's been done already. They're trying to do more. Good news is the courts are finally putting a stop to some of the craziest aspects of it. So overall, the administration likes to gloat that they've forgiven $169 billion in debt so far. That's both an underestimate and an overestimate. So a lot of the public sector loan forgiveness loan stuff would have been forgiven anyway. So some of that 169 billion would have happened regardless. But it's also a big underestimate because some things like the student loan payment pause, which was extended for 3.5 years, we have no idea how much of that was just paused versus how much of that is actually going to end up being forgiven because they counted those 3.5 years as if the student was making payments towards their 10 years of public sector loan forgiveness or their 20 years for the repay program. So we honestly have no idea how expensive those are going to end up being. If I had to guess, my guess would be that that's actually going to be one of the most expensive things that the administration achieves. I think the 3 big loan forgiveness plans that they've proposed won't actually happen because I think the courts will stop them. So what are some lessons that we learned from this? I think there's a real danger of a Pyrrhic victory here for the loan forgiveness advocates. So they've forgiven a lot of loans, but the courts are now going to have a lot of precedents to push back. I think it's woken up Congress to the fact that if they want to see this happen or don't want to see it happen, they need to write clear laws. Another lesson learned is that standing is going to be very, very tricky going forward. So the first student loan plan got thrown out because of an obscure Missouri agency that nobody's ever heard of called MOHELA. It happens to be a state-affiliated student loan servicer. At the beginning of the administration, there were 9 student loan servicers. There's now 7. What's going to happen next time if MOHELA is no longer a student loan servicer? and any other state affiliated. All of a sudden, no states have standing to sue, and you can sneak these things through because nobody can sue to stop them. I don't think the issue is going away. So there's a lot of media and political benefits for proposing these schemes. There's a lot of political and media costs to opposing them. And then that is pretty much the lessons learned. The one thing that this group in particular I think would be particularly interested in is if you want to do something pretty radical with the student loan system, we've got a pretty narrow window of opportunity. So historically, when the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, has scored student loans, they've scored as taking a small profit for the government, so about half a cent for every dollar lent. And so this was a problem because if you wanted to, say, get rid of the student loan programs, you had to come up with a pay for to do it, and it was very costly. You'd have to raise taxes on somebody or cut some other spending. That's not the case anymore. So right now, the CBO is estimating that it costs about 20 cents in the current subsidy rate, which means the government is losing 20 cents for every dollar that's lent out. So that means that if you got rid of the student loan programs completely, you'd have about $200 billion to play with in either cutting taxes or spend somewhere else. Now that window is going to close though, because the courts are either going to throw out the current student loan regulations, and in which case that subsidy rate will shrink, or a lot of these are one time. In fact, so you won't see a huge subsidy rate impact going forward. So if you want to do something with student loans, we have a very narrow window of opportunity where we could do that. I've probably already gone over time, so let me pass it on to Preston.
Thanks very much, Andrew. And I'm sorry that your slides didn't work with the technology, but I think it's probably all for the best because by the time you finished your presentation, there would have been a new loan cancellation plan, which meant they would have been out of date. So. Thanks for having me, everyone. I'm Preston Cooper. I'm a senior fellow with the American Enterprise Institute, where my work focuses on higher education policy. And I want to provide, a little bit of context for kind of how we got here. And for most of the history of federal involvement in higher education, going back to the Higher Education Act of 1965, there's been this implicit assumption undergirding federal policy, which is that higher education always pays off. And I think in the last decade or so, people have started to really question that implicit assumption. So a Wall Street Journal poll taken last year showed that 53% of Americans now believe that a four-year college degree is not worth the cost. And the problems that we've had with student debt, with people getting degrees that don't have a whole lot of value in the labor market, have certainly contributed a lot to this perception. I would argue, though, that the truth is somewhere in the middle. On average, some higher education can be a good financial bet for folks, but no one is exactly the average. And we have these kind of big problems in the higher education system that are not revealed by the average, but which are leading to a lot of these issues that we have with student loans and the fact that the student loan program, which was once a profit center for the government, is now this huge money drain on the federal budget. So at my organization, my previous organization, the Foundation for Research on Equal Opportunity, we kind of set out to measure, what are actually our taxpayers getting for their huge investments in higher education, about $30 billion a year for Pell Grants, $100 billion a year in student loans. And we did find that, higher education can be a good bet sometimes, but often, there are a lot of programs which are federally funded, which don't pay off for either students or for taxpayers. Sometimes students are going to colleges which simply charge too much relative to what they're delivering. Sometimes people are choosing majors which might be fun to take classes in, but don't have a whole lot of relevance in the labor market, so they find it hard to get good college-level jobs. And then we have a huge dropout problem as well. So about 40% of students who start a college degree never actually end up finishing, and they leave college maybe with some debt, but no degree, so they're not getting that or the earnings benefits of those degrees. And we find that a lot of student loan distress is concentrated among this group that has debt but no degree. So I want to talk a little bit about specific areas where we're seeing big problems besides that. Especially at the graduate level. So right now, about half of new student loans issued by the federal government go to graduate students. And so graduate students can borrow unlimited amounts from the federal government, unlike undergraduates. And this has created a lot of perverse incentives for institutions So if you can basically get an unlimited amount of loans from the federal government, which will then be forgiven through the various programs that Andrew's outlined, there's basically no price discipline there. So we see a lot of institutions adding these, quite frankly, very silly master's and doctoral degree programs, charging an arm and a leg for them, enrolling students, and watching as those students get that expensive degree and really can't do anything with it in the labor market. And so they end up not paying back their loans in full, and taxpayers kind of end up eating the cost of that. But there are also some bright spots aside from the doom and gloom that I've been talking about here. One area of that's a good source of optimism that we identified in our research is trade schools. So if you go to a community college vocational program or private vocational school and you study a trade and try to enter a profession like becoming an electrician or an HVAC technician or a welder or a licensed practical nurse, those programs often have very good payoff. They have pretty modest costs, pretty short durations, pretty high graduation rates, and those can often be a very good deal for students, often competitive with the return on investment of a bachelor's degree. But one thing that all these programs have in common is that they are federally funded, and that is because of that assumption that I alluded to at the beginning of these remarks, that higher education always pays off. And I think people are really starting to question that on both sides of the aisle. The Biden Department of Education has kind of seen this and taken one approach where they've really gone after for-profit colleges and basically tried to forgive the student loans of everybody else. But I think that this is a pretty incomplete approach because the problem is not limited to for-profits. There are a lot of pretty low-quality degrees, worthless degrees that are offered by public and private nonprofit institutions. And if you just forgive the loans of students who have gotten a bad deal on higher education, you're really not doing anything about the $1 trillion in new loans that the Congressional Budget Office expects we're going to issue over the coming decade or so. So you're really just kicking down the road. 5 years, we're going to be right back where we started. And that's why I believe that this is really a task for Congress to fix, not the Education Department. We really do need comprehensive reform of the student loan program, accountability for colleges, and to kind of rationalize some of the worst excesses of federal higher education policy. I'm very excited about the College Cost Reduction Act, which Dr. Fox's office has been working very hard on. And I won't go into detail on that because I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the proposals there. But I just want to say that I think that there's a lot of promise there that we could have some serious higher education reform, which could really improve the system both for students and for taxpayers. I'll leave it there and turn it over to Paul.
Thanks so much, Preston. I'm Paul Zimmerman. I'm Senior Counsel with the Defense of Freedom Institute for Policy Studies. I think Case just brought me here to kind of riff on what you and Andrew just said. I don't know if I could add a ton, but I can say a little bit about our organization and our goals. We were started in 2021 by former senior political appointees in the DeVos Education Department who really wanted to push back against the excesses of the Biden department. And starting in 2022, it really started to get centered on the student loan proposals, especially the mass student loan cancellation proposal that came out of the Biden administration that year, and was blocked by the Supreme Court ultimately in 2023. And since then, we've been engaged in this battle. A lot of the way that we fight is to file public comments, essentially pointing out the flaws with these rules and trying to lay the basis for the litigation. I think that has been pretty successful so far in the lawsuits that have been brought by dozens of states challenging these regulations. But I think the damage, even though the courts are responding in a good way to these lawless regulations, the damage is being done, and I think it's in two ways, and we're trying to address both of those. But the first way is the separation of powers is just completely being undone. The Biden administration is just using statutes that have nothing to do with canceling loans and trying to use them as vehicles to pay for the cost of college and expand federal funding at the expense of American taxpayers for the higher education system. They have done it multiple times. They've done it in many different areas, as Andrew discussed. And they're going to continue to make it an election issue, and they're going to continue to try to essentially buy votes with their student loan schemes. The second issue is that Representative Owens talked about kids and grandkids running circles around us, and that's the point of our education system. They're not going to be running circles around us if we have kids lining up every 4 to 8 years for loan forgiveness. Every time your loan gets too big, you say, it's the federal government's job to pay for it's the taxpayer's job to pay for the cost of my college education. We shouldn't be giving college students or high school students the expectation that the federal government is going to take charge of their debts, that they are not responsible for their own debts. That's what's happening now. It's become an election issue, and the courts are thankfully responding. I think we're kind of entering a phase of, unfortunately, regulatory ping pong, where each administration is just going to knock back and forth the issue of student loan debt until finally, I think, Congress needs to step in, be the adult in the room, and fix the system.
I guess I'll bring you home. I'm Bob Carey. I'm my correct title is Chief Bottle Washer at the National Defense Committee. And when they asked me to come on over to run it, I said, I don't know if I can be Chief Bottle Washer, because I see all these nonprofit executives who call themselves the Chief Executive Officer. I'm like, when's the last time you ran a P&L line? So, but the other element is that we get our hands dirty at the National Defense Committee. We get into the guts of it. The best way to fight regulatory overreach is to learn the regulation. And so we get down and dirty on that, and we're willing to go to court in order to be able to do so. We're a veteran organization. I did 32 years in the Navy, I had a ROTC scholarship. I took out a Pell Grant before I went into ROTC. I got my I was also work study. I got into the Naval War College, so I had a federal agency do my master's degree. I've benefited a lot from federal government, the federal government providing this opportunity to me. But I knew that when I signed the contract. I signed a contract for my ROTC contract, and I knew that I was going to get my college paid for, and I knew that I owed them 4 to 8 years, depending on what I did when I joined the Navy and when I went to the Navy after that. And that was the deal. Same thing when I signed on for an additional 6 years in order to be able to get my GI Bill benefits. I knowingly did that because it was going to be an earned benefit. It's the same. We look at educational benefits, especially the GI Bill and other types of military and veteran educational benefits, as earned benefits. No different than my retirement pay. No different than the semi-annual pay, the semi-monthly pay that I used to get when I was on active duty. And for the federal government to say where I can and cannot use my educational benefits is sort of like them saying, here's your paycheck. You can only shop at the Navy Exchange. You can't shop at Target. And that's wrong. That's fundamentally wrong. And then the other element of this just frosts me up is that, when I was on active duty, I was in the combat arms. I did a couple tours letting people shoot at me. When I was on active duty, you and your parents trusted their sons and daughters' lives to me. But once I'm a veteran, I can't be trusted to figure out where I want to go to school. Big brother Department of Education needs to come on in and do this. So we put together a report. You should have the executive summary here. We also put together a report. And since I'm pursuing my doctorate in public policy right now, I geeked out on the report. And it's long, and there's a lot of footnotes and a lot of references. But I wanted to be able to come ready, loaded for bear. And there's a fundamental element here that I see the Department of Education using its regulatory authority to as Representative Owens said, to choose educational winners and losers in order to be able to support the traditional public and private nonprofit schools, that make up most of the Department of Education bureaucrats, and who also spend a fair amount of money on congressional lobbying and on contributions. And the reason is because the military and veteran students are, they don't need financial aid oftentimes. They are a secure funding source, and they want them. And so they're going to go to the Department of Education. The traditional universities are going to go to the Department of Education and say, don't let them go to where they want to go, which is non-traditional education. Why? Because they're older. They oftentimes have families. They got a job as they transition out of the military, and they want a more focused educational program because, in my undergraduate degree, I had to take 4 semesters of Spanish, and yes, when I was in the Navy and I pulled in, I had some chances to be able to use that Spanish in some ports, but that's it. And why did they force me to do that? So, one of the things we say in the report is that these bureaucrats are basically using their regulatory power in order to be able to force the military and veteran students to go to traditional schools when they want to go to these other ones. The last thing I'm going to talk about is the negotiated rulemaking process the Department of Education uses, and that it's fundamentally corrupted. Now, negotiated rulemaking is great. I love negotiated rulemaking process. But the problem is that the negotiated rulemaking process at the Department of Education, they've chosen the people that they bring in for that. And in fact, the veteran military representative has been the same guy for like 4 different negotiated rulemaking committees, a guy named Barnak Sion over at the Veterans Education Success. And, this is a group that the Department of Veterans Affairs Office of Inspector General wrote a report basically saying, yeah, they probably broke the law in how they hired the director of the Office of Educational Services at the Department of Veterans Affairs. They hired her husband to lobby her. And they said, and I don't know of too many veteran educational groups out there that have a Department of Veteran Affairs Inspector General report about them. So, I think one of the things we're going to discuss in the question and answer is, what is the proper role of the federal government in this? The question I'm going to ask is, why can't the states do this? The states have traditionally always done this. Why is the federal government having to come in and do this now? Okay, I know we want to all have some time for questions. If there's anything you want me to particularly settle on, more than happy to do that. But I'll turn back over to the question and answer. What it seems that they're doing wrong is getting too many students. And they're getting too many students through a non-traditional method. I mean, Liberty probably has, about 10,000 undergraduate students in person and graduate students in person, but they have about 100,000 online. I'm an online doctorate student. And I used to teach at the Naval War College, used to teach at the Naval Academy. It's pretty hardcore. They don't let me bring, light stuff to school. I got to produce. And I appreciate that. But there's this underlying perception at the Department of Education that, if it's not in person, it can't be good. Or if it's not a traditional school, it can't be good. And they're trying to drive, they're trying to basically support the traditional schools' overhead of, a lot of research and a lot of non-teaching stuff in order to be able and do so by forcing students to pay tuition, only a portion of which actually goes to teaching. So that's what I'm not as familiar with GCU's enforcement. But with Liberty, it seems like it's a penalty in search of a problem. And they just don't like what they're doing, so they're going to figure out some way to be able to penalize them.
There's a lot of overlap with how they're using existing statutes that have been around for a long time to try and drive through these big regulatory changes. It seems to be that they're doing this similar thing with a lot of these cases, like the Grand Canyon one. The department was claiming that they didn't give PhD students accurate total cost information. And then Grand Canyon was like, here's the information we provided. And it's very clearly like, here's the required credits. And then if you take continuing credits, here's how much they cost. Like if you're going into a PhD program and you can't read that table, we got a big problem. Like, so the fact that the department was going to fine them, I think it was like 27 million, something like that, for stuff like that. It was just like, it was so out of left field that it was just like there's something else going on here.
Is this related to their marketing at all? Are they tying it back to that with the presentation?
I don't know details on
We
that.
see that all the time. They're using predatory marketing tactics. Some of these state AGs do, and it's like the old Don Draper trick from Mad Men. Their cigarettes are poison, ours are toasted. So you have schools like Global Campus of Maryland and Southern New Hampshire University. They have ads on all day, all night, no problem. But if you're one of these other schools,
But they're public.
yeah,
But they're public, so they're all right.
well, kind of they are, but the
No,
the online,
that's the
yeah.
attitude.
Oh, right, yeah.
That's the attitude. Oh, they're
Right.
public. So they're the exact same model, but they're public.
They
so
play
they're all right.
ball. I was wondering, with regard to the debt forgiveness that has gone through, are there any thresholds? Is there any means testing or how much debt people have, the kind of debt they have, their current salary, or is it what we've seen so far, especially under BDR, has it been just blanket forgiveness, or are they actually parsing it by?
So, like, of the 9 things, like
Of,
every one of them
a-
has a
let's
different
say the
approach.
Sweet versus-
Yeah.
especially Sweet versus Cardona with the 150, schools or so that are in there. Is it just a rubber stamp, or is there any kind of guidepost?
So
on
for
what-
those particular ones, it was if you went to the school and we've determined that school's bad,
Okay.
it doesn't matter how much debt. I would say that the trend has been for them to target to basically try to make it more in means tested, but without giving up the political benefit of basically telling everybody your loans are going to be forgiven. Like with the first one, I think it was like 95% of students would have benefited from the first student loan.
So no matter how much you're making, 5
Yeah.
years later, you can.
So
okay.
they could, like, you get the benefit of saying we aren't benefiting the top 1%, but it's like, well, you could still be a couple making $250,000 and you would get loan forgiveness.
I testified before the negotiated rulemaking committee on this loan forgiveness stuff, and it's not means testing the income; it's means testing the debt levels. So if you go and take out $100,000 in school loans, and then you jack up your credit card bills, if you have a big credit card bill, then you get loan forgiveness. So it's like it's establishing a moral hazard of, go out there and spend like a drunken sailor, and we'll forgive you for your school.
Yeah, so the one of the upcoming loan forgiveness plans that they have, which is not released yet, but we've seen kind of the framework that they want to use for it, will cancel debt for people who are experiencing hardship. What does hardship mean? That is a very good question. I would like to know that myself. They have a list of about 17 different criteria that could theoretically qualify as hardship. How they're exactly going to use those, it's a complete black box. We don't know. 2 of the criteria that could potentially be used, we calculated would cover about 70% of college students. So they're trying to make it seem like it is more means tested, more targeted. But I think the way that they're writing the regulations will give them a lot of leeway to basically just kind of forgive debt for whoever they want, whether those people are low income or not.
Wasn't one of the criteria too for hardship if the secretary determines if you have hardship? Like it wasn't.
Yes, there's a catch-all other category. But yeah.
If you're someone today who has kids and you want to send them to college and get a good education, and we were talking about a little bit how it used to be, you kind of accept that they're going to have some liberal professors here and there, and things have sort of gotten out of hand recently, as we've seen. But you were mentioning, well, we've heard that if you go have a college degree, you'll make $1 million more over the course of your life. Some statistic that was just always out there. No one ever checked it or anything. And what you're talking about, Preston, is that depending upon what kind of degree you do get, making it worthwhile. We've seen half, apparently, or just more than half of people who are 5 years out of school are in jobs that didn't require their degree. And you have like Cato Institute and other people that put out 25 schools where you don't have to walk on eggshells. They have a regular, these are schools you can send your kid to, and they're not going to be indoctrinated, or they're not going to have things thrown on them for free speech. And so is there some resource where you can look and see there is a good return on either at this school or this type of degree? Some are obvious, maybe like engineers and IT. Aside from that, or is there a resource for parents or people who really want to get the return for their money?
I am so glad you asked that because we have one. So if you go to roi.freopp.org, that is roi.freopp.org. That's my organization, FREOP. We have a tool where you can basically look up the estimated financial value for 53,000 different degree certificate programs. So you can, within the same institution, compare different majors and so forth. But to kind of more directly answer your question, we do see some kind of trends emerge in the data there. Yes, it's pretty rare to get $1 million return from a college degree, but a lot of them do have, some pretty decent returns if you follow a few rules. So, number one, pick a major that at least has some labor market relevance. So engineering, computer science, nursing, economics, business, even political science. I'm sure this crowd will be glad to know tend to do pretty well in the ROI metrics. They tend to enable people to get pretty decent paying jobs and launch pretty good careers. Other fields which are a bit more general, so art, music, psychology, English literature. There are some programs which are decent, but a lot of those degrees just simply don't have a very good payoff at all. And then your choice of institution matters a lot as well. You'll, all else being equal, you'll probably want to go to a school that is not charging an arm and a leg for tuition. Places like NYU and USC, they just tend to be charging way too much to justify the value of the degrees that they're offering. And you also want to make sure that you pick a school that has a decent track record of actually graduating students. The number one risk for students when they start college is that they won't finish, because we know that most of the economic benefits of college are tied up in that degree that you get at the end. And unfortunately, there's a lot of schools out there that have a 10-20% graduation rate, and the students who come out of those schools tend not to do very well.
Are we seeing a lot of the career-oriented and skill-oriented schools? I don't know how their tuition and costs compare to some of the four-year ones, but are they rated in that as well, where you can?
Yeah, so we also look at community colleges and trade schools, and so at that level too, it really depends on the field of study. So if you go to a trade school and you study welding, you study HVAC repair, as long as you go to one that's pretty reasonably priced and has a decent graduation rate, you're probably going to do pretty well. But then there are other fields like the liberal arts, cosmetology, some of these other fields that might lead to lower paying jobs or might not have direct labor market relevance at all. Those tend not to pay off very well. So it really does come down to the field of study.
Well, and the great thing about Preston's website is that, if you know you want to do nursing, you can enter nursing and search by you can find the right school with the right nursing. Or if you know you're going to go to NYU, you can then look by school. So having it broken down by program, credential is super valuable to students, because a lot of students do know, I want to be a nurse or I want to be an engineer. In which case you can really say, okay, which school is the best one for me? So it's much better than just going to plastics, if you remember that.
It'd be
the old
interesting
movie.
to have $1 million threshold. You're talking about a 40-year career, so if you're saying $1 million over that period of time, you could have a low-paying job and just invest in NVIDIA, or you can take that $100,000 and then put it in the market. In 40 years, you probably could do a lot of interesting things with the investments. I have one last question for Bob, and then that's for me, but. We know that the Supreme Court has upheld property rights through substantive due process and entitlements. Has anybody, 9010, the GI Bill of Rights is not an entitlement. Like you said, it's something people have earned. Has that ever been challenged or?
I don't know. Substantive property rights has been, or substantive due process has been brought into this. I know that there's plenty of case law that veteran benefits are in fact property. That they're not, people will say, oh, this is something that the government is giving you, therefore it's an affirmative, it's not a prop. No, the court just said, no, there's an expectation of this, there's a transaction, there's property. But I would want to bring up one thing about court cases, and that is with the Supreme Court's recent ruling about Chevron deference. So here's an opportunity for you all as congressional staff. If you don't like a proposed regulation that the Department of Education is putting in, write about how you don't like it for your boss and how your boss thinks that they got congressional intent incorrect. The reason is Department of Education going to change their mind because of this? Probably not. They know what they want. They're going to do it regardless. They're just going to go through the process in order to be able to meet the requirements of the Administrative Procedures Act. But what it does now that Chevron deference is set aside by Loper Wright, is that it provides opportunities for any of our organizations to now go in and argue for arbitrary and capricious activity and overstating of congressional intent by the regulatory agency, and give us the standing on that alone. So don't hesitate to submit comments on notices of proposed rulemaking by the Department of Education, especially if you think it got it wrong, because then we can go on it. We can try to back cleanup for you.
Bob, not only that, but for the FAFSA and other student loans that are available, there's no any kind of discrimination or thresholds or testing that go with the, unless I'm wrong, Preston might know, or you guys might be aware of, where you're not, you can be limited through 90/10, but if I'm just going to get a regular staffer or a federally subsidized loan, is the government going to go, no, this is a waste, you can't do that, or there, you want to be a...
Well, we argue that since those educational benefits for veterans are in fact the veterans' property,
Right. Yeah.
they should not be considered part of the 90% because it's not technically coming from the government. I have the rights to that property that the government is currently holding. I'm telling them where to send it.
Yeah, what's wrong is that a property right is being treated less favorably than what is essentially a privilege.
So I hadn't thought of it that way before, and thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like with the 90/10, there's no reason to treat the GI Bill different than the person's paycheck, and they're doing that right now. So if you use GI Bill to pay for your schooling, your school could get in trouble. But if you use your paycheck to do it, they can't. Like there's no, it doesn't make any sense.
Okay, I think we're doing good here. No more questions. We'll thank our panel and thank you all for being here. We really appreciate all the information we got. And lots of follow-up, and you'll be hearing from us as we continue to work on these issues and help support the committee's work and the great research of free market work you guys are all doing on this on behalf of students and our economy, our future, and America. So thank you very much. Okay. All right.